will now be in session. All rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and Senators of the Republic.
Majo. Si Majo. Basta alam mo. The 22nd session of the Senate, the second regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. We will be led in prayer today by our distinguished Majority Floor Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva.
Let's put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Dakilang Diyos, Ama naming sumasalangit, kami po ay naninikluhod at lumalapit sa iyong paanan, humihingi ng kapatawaran sa anumang pagkukulang, pagkakamali at kasalanan. Kasalanang namana namin, kasalanang sinasadya o hindi. Humihingi po kami ng tawad, linisin mo po kami ng iyong banal na dugo na nabuo sa krus ng Kalbaryo at hayaan mong madamitan mo po kami ng iyong damit ng katwiran at makalapit po kami sa iyong paanan. Ngayong araw na ito, as we open our session, please allow us to fulfill our duties and responsibilities as representatives of the people. Help us to continue to craft laws and oversee the functions of this government. And we know for a fact, Lord, that you love us and you want us to succeed and to give honor and glory to your name. We also pray for the victims of earthquake in Morocco. Death toll now is 2,901 and 5,530 were injured. We pray for our brethren there, and we also pray for our people here in the Philippines and scattered all over the world. We also acknowledge, Lord, your goodness and faithfulness to our beloved President, President Bongbong Marcos, who is celebrating his birthday today. We pray that you guide him and give him wisdom, the treasury of wisdom from heaven, and your favor, immense favor, be upon him as he leads this nation, our country, for your glory alone. We love you and praise you. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen and amen. Thank you.
Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binoy, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Hontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Ligarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, Senate President Subiri.
With 21 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, before we proceed, Mr. President, may we be allowed to put into the record that today we wanted to greet our blooming principal of the Senate, Senator Cynthia Villar, and former Senate President Manny Villar. Happy 48th anniversary, Mr. President.
Happy 48th anniversary to the Villars, Senator Cynthia Villar and former Senate President Manny Villar.
Who is
Who did not hear your greetings, unfortunately.
Mr. President. Yeah, but blooming again. Blooming senator who is not paying attention, Mr. President.
Yes. Ma'am Cynthia, happy birthday daw po.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary pala. Happy anniversary.
That's why she's blooming.
That's right.
It's been said like 100 times already, Mr. President. And she's still not listening. Mr. President, may I also take this opportunity to greet our SecGen, Secretary Renato Bantuga, happy birthday, who's celebrating his birthday tomorrow, Mr. President.
Tomorrow, unfortunately, he's in a meeting for our cybersecurity for the new Senate building. He'll be in about 30 minutes.
Yes, Mr.
Happy
President,
birthday
we
to
also
our
like
Secretary.
to acknowledge guests of this representation and guests of Senator Go and our Senate President, Senator Zubiri, Governor Datu Pax Ali Manguda Datu of Sultan Kudarat, Congresswoman Bai Rihan Sakularan of the 1st District of Sultan Kudarat, Mayor Maria Lourdes Alejandrino and Vice Mayor Emmanuel Alejandrino of Arayat, Pampanga, guest of Senator Bato, guest of Senator Tolentino, Pastor Peter Kim, Pastor Vincent Baucas, and Pastor Jin Yun Kim of International Youth Fellowship. We welcome all of them in this August
Yes,
chamber.
we'd like to welcome them all to the Senate. Maybe ask for 1 minute suspension so we can approach them.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President, with the consent of the good one, the Deputy Majority Leader, Senator J.B. Ejercito, may I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from the city of San Juan, no other than Senator Jinggoy Estrada, to deliver his speech.
Yes, to avail of the privileged hour is a distinguished colleague from San Juan, Senator and Chairperson of the Committee on Labor, Senator Jinggoy Estrada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to bring to the attention of this August Chamber the latest development on the case of the abused kasambahay, LV Vergara, which the Senate Committee on Justice and Human Rights, under the chairmanship of our esteemed colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino, is currently investigating. Isang nakakabahalang kaganapan po ang nangyari kagabi na kinasasangkutan ng dating kasamahan sa trabaho ni LV, si alias Dodong, na pinagtangkaang barilin ng riding in tandem na may suot na bonnet. Si Dodong ay tumatayong testigo sa mga pang-aabuso at pagmamaltrato ng employers ni LV sa Mamburao, Occidental Mindoro na sina Franz at Pablo Ruiz. Bago na pabalitang nasabing insidente kay Dodong, ilang gabi na pala na may umaaligid sa bahay ng kanyang kasulukuyang employers at nagtatanong sa mga residente ng bayan ng Paluan, Occidental Mindoro, kung saan siya nakatira. Tinakasan ni Dodong ang pamilya Ruiz dahil na rin sa takot na malagay sa alanganin ng kanyang buhay. Ganun pa man, handang tumistigo si Dodong para patotohanan ang mga bintang ni LV at sa katunayan ay nagsumiti na siya ng sinumpaang salaysay sa piskalya kung saan nakasampa ang kaso laban sa mag-asawang Ruiz. Ginoong Pangulo, aking napag-alaman na kanina madaling araw ay nasecure na si Dodong at ngayon ay nasa pangangalaga ng CIDG Regional Headquarters sa Calapan, Mindoro Oriental. At dahil na rin sa napabalitang pag-casing ng mga kahina-hinaalang mga lalaki sa tinutuluyan ni Dodong, minarapat na mga kaanak at nagmamalasakit kay LV na ilipat siya sa mas ligtas na lugar nitong nakaraang Lunes. At dahil sa mga pangyayaring ito, maging ang mga kasulukuyang employers ni Dodong ay nangangamba na rin sa kanilang kaligtasan. Dalawa pang dating mga tauhan na mag-asawang Ruiz na sina alias JM at alias Patrick na maaaring magbigay linaw sa kaso ni LV ay napag-alaman ko na nagtatago at hindi matuntun ng mga kinauukulan. Ginoong Pangulo, bago pa man nangyari ang pagtatangka sa buhay ni Dodong, may mga pulis at sundalo nang nakabantay sa bahay ng kanyang bagong employer batay sa ulat noong September 10 ng ABS-CBN reporter na si Dennis Datu. Bantay sarado man sila, ay nagawa pa rin ang pagtatangka sa buhay ni Dodong. Kaya nakakapagtaka kung bakit nangyari pa ito. Mr. President, I don't want to point an accusing finger at anyone at this point, but one cannot help but wonder about these bold and brazen acts against these defenseless individuals. I believe it is necessary to provide additional security for Dodong, Dodong's employers, and even to aliases JM and Patrick, if they ultimately agree to testify before the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Criminal charges of serious physical injuries, illegal detention in violation of Republic Act number 10361 or the Batas Kasambahay were already filed against Vergara's employers before the office of the city prosecutor in Batangas City. Mukhang pader na may tuturong ang binabangga ni na LV, Dodong, JM at Patrick. Maliit na bagay kung tutusin ang pagbibigay seguridad sa kanilang kaligtasan kung ang kapalit naman ito ay ang paglalahad ng katotohanan laban sa mga lumalapastangan sa ating mga umiiral na batas at para sa pagtataguyod ng mas naangkop ng mga pulisya. Protecting the witnesses is not just a legal obligation. It is a moral imperative. By upholding this duty, we not only promote the principles of fairness and equality, ensure an environment where they can testify freely and without fear, and foster a culture where the voices of those silenced but willing to stand up for the truth are heard regardless of their social standing and circumstances. Thank you, Mr. President. By the way, Mr. President, I will entertain interpellations after the period of amendments by the good one in his bill, Mr. Senate President.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, just for the record, he insisted that you all go ahead of him in the agenda today. So, Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I think Senator Bato de la Rosa is raising his hand, Mr. President.
Yes, our distinguished colleague from Bohol and Davao, Senator Bato de la Rosa is recognized.
Just a short manifestation lang, Mr. President, Majority Leader. I wish to associate myself with the privileged speech being delivered by our good colleague, Senator from San Juan. Alam mo, Mr. President, I think public order really is something that is need to be focused on sa ibang lugar ng Pilipinas. Hindi naman lahat, Mr. President, pero ito ngayon, you can just imagine the sequence of events. Kung gaano kaabusado yung mga amo. Ewan ko kung amo ba is a Tagalog term, Mr. President?
Amo, yes.
Is a Visayan term for us.
Amo din.
Amo.
Yes.
Yung amo nung katulong na binulag, if you were able to hear the testimonies that were delivered during the committee hearing of Senator Tolentino, grabe, sobra-sobra yung pang-abuso. Tapos ngayon, nakasecure tayo ng isang witness na makatulong para mapanagot ang may sala. Ngayon, yung witness na isang trabahante rin nila, ay ngayon ay inattempt pa na patayin kagabi. It was not really an attempt, but it was a frustrated murder ang nangyari kagabi. Mabuti na nakatakbo at mabuti naman at mabilis nakatawag kay Senator Tolentino at natulungan rin natin na maikunik sa CIDG. Because you can just imagine, request yung ordinaryong tao lang ito, nag-request na huwag nyo kaming i-refer sa local police dahil mayaman yan at very influential dito sa lugar namin yung mga suspect. Please, sa CIDG nyo kami ipa-refer. So, we are very much dismayed, Mr. President, being the chairman of public order and dangerous drugs. Pag ganun ang reaksyon ng isang ordinaryong mamamayan na nagiging biktima ng karahasan na ayaw magtiwala sa local police dahil influential yung mga suspect, ay siguro, isa lang yan, Mr. President, pero ang dami pa siguro sa buong Pilipinas na nag-experience ng ganun na injustice na kanilang dinaranas ngayon. So I hope that, Mr. President, Senator Tolentino will act swiftly on this case and he should call another hearing para mabigyan ng lesson itong mga suspect na ito, Mr. President. Dahil sobra na talaga. I hope Senator Tolentino will do that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I recognize the two gentlemen raising their hands, Mr. President, I cannot help also, Mr. President, but join our distinguished colleague, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, in condemning in strongest terms this harassment against our kababayan, Dodong Vergara. Mr. President, seeing that video na mismong sarili mong pulis, hindi ka maprotektahan, sarili mong pulis sa iyong komunidad, hindi mo ma-exercise yung right mo to go around, Mr. President. Nakakalungkot, Ginoong Pangulo. And I hope and pray na gaya ng mga nakaraang pagkakataon, ang Senado ay tumayo at nanindigan para ipagtanggol ang marginalized sector of our society. At hindi tayo dapat pumayag, Ginoong Pangulo, na magpatuloy ang ganitong uri ng gawain na maging palakasan system. Pati doon sa kitang-kita naman, Ginoong Pangulo, yung ginawang panghaharas at pagmamaltrato sa ating maliliit na kababayan. With that, Mr. President, may I move that we recognize Senator Francis Tolentino, the chairperson of
Before
our
we
Justice.
recognize Senator Francis Tolentino, I was wondering about that because there was a video. What were the two policemen doing going back and forth? Were they scouting the area? Were they unfriendly forces, or were they trying to secure
They were
the gentleman?
looking for him. They were obviously harassing, Mr. President, our kababayan, Dodong Vergara. And as mentioned by Senator Bato, during the hearing, the concerned personalities were asking not to allow the local police to meddle and be part of this investigation because they feel that they are not safe.
Thank
That's
you,
a sad
Majority
fact,
Leader.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Senator Tolentino is seeking
Senator
the floor. Mr. President.
Tolentino is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the good gentleman from San Juan for reiterating again the need to act expeditiously in order to seek justice, attain justice for Manang LV Vergara. Rest assured, Mr. President, that your Committee on Justice and Human Rights will be doing everything. In fact, last night, for the record, Mr. President, I, together with Senator De La Rosa, were the ones who collaborated with the Regional Police Director of Mimaropa around 10:30 p.m. last night, Mr. President. General Joel Doria assured us that alias Dodong will be secured. Senator De La Rosa contacted the CIDG to ensure likewise that alias Dodong will be brought to safety within the premises of CIDG in Calapan. So at around 3 a.m., Mr. President, nilipat nga si alias Dodong sa Calapan. Hindi pa ho siguro ito ang huling kabanata, and we are moving forward to have even Manang LV Vergara be placed under the Witness Protection Program. Your committee has already provided, together with Senators Padilla and Estrada, medical services for Manang LV, who was blinded both eyes. Your committee has likewise provided free legal services for Manang LV Vergara. Hindi pa ho tayo titigil dito hanggat hindi pa ho ito natutuldukan, at naniniwala po kami na kahit 5 o 6 yung abogado na dinadala nung Ruiz couple, meron pong pupuntahan po ito. Rest assured, Mr. President, that we will still conduct another hearing, and with the assistance of Senator De La Rosa, Senator Padilla, Senator Estrada, and even Senator Tulfo before, during the first hearing, I think this will not just be highlighted, but justice will be served, Mr. President. Yun lamang po, at ulitin ko, ang inyong committee ay tuloy-tuloy po ang pagtrabaho dito. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat, the Chairperson of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Yes, Senator Bato de la Rosa.
Just a short, Mr. President, I might be misconstrued as to not having trust and confidence to the local police, Mr. President, with my previous statement, but in fairness to the local police, they have my full trust and confidence. I'm just re-echoing the sentiment of Dodong, being an ordinary citizen, na talagang marginalized na tao. Tapos ngayon, just to emphasize, I am not emphasizing the inefficiency of the police. No. I am emphasizing ang lawak ng saklaw, ng clout, or influence nito mga suspect na ito. Kaya nakapagsabi si Dodong ng ganon. Takot siya. Pero in fairness to the local police, they will not, they are performing their job. They are enforcing the law without fear or favor. But in-emphasize lang talaga natin na natakot si Dodong. Yun lang, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat.
Baka mamaya magalis sa akin yung local police. I trust them fully, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, my dear
Mr.
colleague.
President, Senator Jingo Estrada is also seeking the floor, Mr. President.
Senator Estrada, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just informed by my staff that the siblings of LV Vergara has been requesting that they be placed also under the Witness Protection Program and also to have an additional security, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, on the
Thank you.
record.
Mr. President, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is also seeking the floor. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleague, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo at sa ating pinunong mayorya. Gusto ko lamang pong magpugay sa ating mahal na Senador Jinggoy Estrada sa pagtindig sa ating mga kasambahay. At kanya po itong legacy talaga. Ang hinihiling ko lamang po, mahal na Pangulo, sana po ay maging mas gigil tayo sa issue na ito sapagkat pagka ang ating mga kasambahay ay namamaltrato sa ibang bansa, tayo po ay nagpapakita talaga na tayo po'y gigil. Pero sa usapin na ito, dapat po mas gigil tayo sapagkat nandito mismo sa bayan natin ang nagbibigay ng ganitong klaseng pagmamaltrato. Napakasakit pong tanggapin, napakahirap namnamin. Pero dapat po, inshallah, mahal na Pangulo, ay bigyan po natin to ng pansin. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As some of our colleagues would like to reserve the right to ask questions later, Mr. President, may I just move now, Mr. President, to proceed with the reference of business.
And the speech will be later referred to
Yes,
another.
Mr. President, we suspend the privilege
Discussions.
hour, Mr. President.
There being no objection, would you want to move to dispense with the reading of the journal first, or?
Not yet, Mr.
Oh, it's not
President.
yet ready,
We are,
okay.
At a later
So,
hour.
there being no objection, we ask the Secretary to proceed.
Thank
with the
you,
rest
Mr.
of the business.
President.
Thank you.
Message from the House of Representatives letter informing the Senate that on 5 September 2023, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. 8580, an act establishing a satellite multi-species marine hatchery of San Juan, Southern Leyte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, and Finance.
8939, establishing a fish port at St. Bernard, Southern Leyte, and appropriating funds therefore.
Committees on Agriculture, Public Works, and Finance.
8910, providing for national policy in preventing adolescent pregnancies and institutionalizing social protection for adolescent parents.
To the Committee on Women and Children, Social Justice, and Rural Development.
8925, an act requiring the proper and immediate burial of Muslim cadavers in accordance with Islamic rites.
To the Committees on Cultural Communities, Muslim Affairs, and Local Government.
8839, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Lee Duan Wang. An act granting Philippine citizenship to Ko Chi Su. An act granting Philippine citizenship to Ko Fang Su. And 8838, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Ko Wei Su.
Refer to Committees on Justice and Human Rights.
8945, an act establishing a land transportation franchising and regulatory board, district office in Katayngan, Masbate, and appropriating funds therefore. 8946, creating an extension office of the Maritime Industry Authority in Liloy, Zamboanga del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Public Services and Finance.
3946, providing for the manner of election of the elected members of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan of Laguna, representing the cities of San Pedro, Santa Rosa, and Binian.
To Committees on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation in Finance.
House Bill number 8441, declaring a parcel of land located in the municipalities of Maria Aurora, San Luis, Baler, and Dingalan, in Aurora and the municipality of Bungabon, the province of Nueva Ecija, a protected area with the category of protected landscape under the National Integrated Protected Area System, to be referred to as Aurora Memorial Protected Landscape, providing for its management and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
8710, establishing a special economic zone in the municipality of Medellin, province of Cebu, creating for the purpose the Cebu 4th District Special Economic Zone Authority, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Bills on first reading, Senate Bill 2435, an act declaring the province of Southern Leyte a tourism zone and appropriating funds therefore, by Senator Go.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
2436 is standardizing the retirement benefits of justices, judges, and judiciary officials conferred with judicial rank, salary, and privileges, and appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose, RA 910 as amended by Senator Go.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
2437, declaring the maritime zones under the jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines, by Senator Tulfo.
Refer to the Special Committee on Philippine Maritime and Admiralty Zones.
2438, to establish the archipelagic sea lanes in the Philippine archipelagic waters, prescribing the rights and obligations of foreign ships and aircraft, exercising the right of archipelagic sea lanes passage to establish archipelagic sea lanes and providing for the associated protected measures therein, by Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Special Maritime and Admiralty Zones.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution 792, a resolution honoring and commending the awardees of the Metrobank Foundation Outstanding Filipinos of 2023, by Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Rules.
793, commending and congratulating Mark Jason Galauran for capturing the silver medal in the 2023 International Powerlifting Federation World Classic and Equipped Sub-Junior and Junior Powerlifting Championships held in Apoca, Romania, by Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
794, calling for the appropriate committees of the Senate of the Republic to conduct an investigation in aid of legislation into the uncoordinated and contradicting policies on rice regulation, by Senator Hontiveros.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Agriculture, Food, and Agrarian Reform.
795, congratulating and commending Team Philippines for the remarkable achievement in winning the overall grand champion title at 26 World Championships of Performing Arts, held from July 28 to August 6, 2023 in Anaheim, California, United States of America, by Senator Villar C.
To the Committee on Rules.
Committee report number 120, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Economic Affairs upon the recommendation of its subcommittee on PENCAS and Blue Economy and Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change and Finance on S number 2439, with Senators Ligarda, Revilla Jr., and Villanueva as authors thereof. An act institutionalizing the Philippine ecosystem, a natural capital accounting system mandating its use in policy and decision-making, designating the agencies responsible for its implementation, providing institutional arrangements among responsible agencies and appropriating funds, therefore recommending its approval, and substitution of Senate Bills 1914, 2041, taking into consideration House Bill 8443, sponsor Senator Ligarda.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute suspension? Just a
Session
minute.
suspended for 1 minute.
I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2386 under Committee Report number 99. This bill pertains to the Real Property Valuation and Assessment Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellations and debate. With that, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, the Chairperson of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to interpellate our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Our distinguished colleague, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, Chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, is recognized, and to interpolate the distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Good sponsor. Would you be willing to take some questions about this?
Yes, more than willingly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, good sponsor, Mr. President. Home ownership. Home ownership is a shared aspiration for many Filipinos, as well as one avenue for families to rise out of poverty. In fact, it is one of the priorities in Ambition Natin 2040, the NEDA's long-term vision for the Philippines. The primary objective of this bill is, in essence, to provide a single valuation for real estate in the Philippines. However, some concerns have been raised regarding higher costs of home ownership brought about by the sudden increase in official land valuations the proposed bill might bring about. Whenever the market values for real property in a particular locality are re-evaluated, the trend is almost always upwards. Thus, accurate po bang sabihin na yung bagong market values sa schedule of market values ay magiging mas mataas kaysa sa existing market values sa ating tax declarations at sa zonal valuations ng Bureau of Internal Revenues, Mr. President?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. Mr. President, not necessarily. It really depends on the value of a particular location. I'll give you a very concrete example, and I will take this from our experience in Valenzuela. We have a portion in Valenzuela, about more or less about 10% of our land area, which is considered flood-prone areas. And that is an area beside Ubando, an area beside Malabon, and we all know those two LGUs are also flood-prone areas. And based on our experience, the market values in that particular area almost for many years never went up because of that condition. And there are very few transactions in that area because obviously nobody wants to live in that area because of its flood-prone feature. And a lot of the residents there does not enjoy improved market values because of the situation. On the contrary, we have an area which is beside MacArthur area, which, as you pointed out very correctly, almost enjoys regular increase in terms of market values. And we can see that because of the transactions. There are regular transactions in that area, meaning some people will sell their property, some people will enter into joint ventures, thereby valuing their property. The values of condominiums along that highway, we can see the high valuation being put by the sellers of condos. So, in other words, it really depends on the situation. If the area is not as attractive to buyers and nobody would want to invest in that area, property values might stay the same. In some cases, it might even go down, depending on the transaction.
Salamat, good sponsor. Of course, and fair enough po, no, yung mga properties na hindi ganong ka-attractive for
Yes.
various reasons, flood-prone man siya o iba pa, ay wala masyadong danger na maapektuhan upwards because of the bill.
Yes.
As in the years before na ipapasa natin itong bill. But possibly, ano yun, and those lands for which the value would go down, possibly itong dalawang categories na ito would be more an exception. Baka, posibleng mas marami yung mga area, lalo na yung mga area na direksyon ng aspiration ng mga Pilipino, ng mga hindi pa homeowners pero pangarap nila. In such areas, Mr. President, I would expect na upward trend. An upward trend would be expected. So, pero posible ba, Mr. President, posible ba na makakakita tayo ng dramatic increase sa official market values ng real property sa buong bansa, Mr. President?
To answer the question directly, in terms of market values, insofar as local governments are concerned, yes, it will increase. And let me just show you a slide, Mr. President. And let me qualify my answer to only local government units because the zonal valuation of the BIR is almost at par with market values. because the zonal valuation of the BIR is re-evaluated or updated much regularly than the local governments, and also it's an administrative action. So in other words, the RDOs can do it themselves. No? And let me just show a slide. Slide 5. And this is just a sample, Mr. President, of different market values in different areas, Mr. President. Like for example, and again, Mr. President, these were randomly chosen. Like for example, in Makati, along Ayala Avenue, in their tax declaration is 40,000 pesos. But the zonal valuation of the BIR there is already 940,000 pesos per square meters. And in recent transactions, no, on the average, and you can check this, people can check this with Colliers, with Lichu, in the website. The transaction can, on the average, is about 1 million pesos per square meter, Mr. President. In Cebu, it's the same. Along Salinas Drive, it's about 8,600 pesos per square meter. And the zonal valuation is 120,000 per square meter. But there are transactions there that ranges, or there are transactions there on the average is about 250,000 per square meter. So the valuation of the local governments typically are much lower because they don't update it on a regular basis. And that's the intention of the bill, is to update it. But then the update of the market values is only one of the variables that dictate the tax due. And I showed that yesterday during the interpellation of the good gentleman from Davao. And let me just flash it again on the screen, slide 2. In the preparation of the tax due of our constituents, you have 3 variables: the schedule of market value, the assessment level, and the tax rate. So there are 3 things or 3 variables that you need to determine in order to reach the tax due. The schedule of market value is only one, and that's what we aim to standardize, no? So that the values will be at par or at least the same with other government agencies, most especially at par with what is being transacted realistically. No? The assessment value and the tax rate, we're not going to touch that. The local government will have full control on what assessment value they will impose on that asset, as well as the tax rate that they will impose on that particular asset. So, in other words, if the schedule of market value goes up, the local governments can reduce the assessment level because in the local government code, there's a ceiling but there's no floor. The tax rate is the same. They can reduce it. In the local government code, there's a ceiling but there's no floor. So they can pull down the assessment level and the tax rate. And it depends on what they want. If they want a status quo, they can do that. If they want to lower it down, they can do that. If they want to increase it by a bit, they can do that. That's the decision of the local government unit.
I see. Thank you, Mr. President. May statistics po ba tayo dun sa average percentage official real estate valuations kung paano siya pwedeng tumaas? Kahit na yung isang variable lang, yung schedule of market values lang ang mababago nitong bill, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, may picture tayo ng...
If the good sponsor would like, Mr. President, possibly even using those areas cited as examples earlier,
Okay.
Makati, Cebu,
Yeah.
Lawag, or others that the good sponsor may prefer.
The question is if we have conducted simulations.
Or, well, whether from simulations or historical records, but no, simulations, I guess, as an effect
Okay.
of this bill, kung may statistics po tayo sa average na pwedeng itaas nung percentage official, or sa average percentage, sorry,
Yeah.
average percentage na pwedeng itaas ng ang official real estate valuations.
Kung gaano kataas. Okay. Hindi, meron na. Alam ko na. Alam ko na. Hold on, Mr. Chairman. We have,
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
President, we have a, hindi. We have a, ano yung percentage difference? Ayan. Okay. All right, Mr.
okay.
President, we have we ran different. We compared different market values of local government versus zonal valuations versus actual market values, no, based on transactions in that area, and we did some. The BLGF supplied us with some LGUs, and they these are just randomly selected, and we'll just flash this on slide 4. Okay. So, Mr. President, like for example, in San Fernando City, no, the zonal valuation is almost 6,500% more
Wow.
than the market values. In Lawag City, it's the same. No? It's 3,304% higher than the market values. And this phenomena is quite normal and quite usual because the zonal valuation is updated very often, and it's done administratively by the BIR. If you look at San Fernando City and compare the zonal valuation with the actual market value, actually the difference is not so big. So in other words, the BIR, during its update, captures the actual market value of that property based on transaction. So the difference in San Fernando is not so big. In Lawag, actually, it's even lesser. The market value is lesser compared to the zonal valuation. No? There are some outliers like Calapan City, but more or less, it's the same. If you compare the schedule of, if you compare the local government market value, or the SMV we call it, no? Schedule of market value versus the actual market value, you can see that the difference is quite high. No? In San Fernando, it's about 6,000%. In Lawag City, it's about 1,800%. In Baybay City, it's about 3,900%. So in other words, Mr. President, what the values being used by the local government unit is quite low or very low compared to the actual market value. It really depends on the local government, no? But the highest that you've seen is in San Fernando. In Valencia City, it's not so bad. It's about 152% difference. So, and the reason for this, Mr. President, is in most cases, the local governments, they don't update the market values. No? So the market values, insofar as the local government is concerned, is quite unrealistic compared to the actual market value being transacted in that locality. So the disparity is so big, it becomes unrealistic anymore.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we're saying that right now it's unrealistic because it doesn't
Reflect
the actual value
Correct.
as pegged by the local government units.
Yes.
And we're saying, Mr. President, that the true or the real value is what the BIR says it is.
It's closer.
Closer.
It's closer, Mr. President. And you can see, like, for example, in Calapan City, there's a 216% difference.
Yes.
But generally, it's closer. No, it's closer because they update it regularly. No?
I have a follow-up question here, but
There's a
maybe Mr.
phone in. There's a
President,
phone
the
in.
Minority Leader would like to interject. Thank you, good sponsor.
with the permission, Mr. President, of our sponsor, so that
you. Please proceed,
we'll
Your Honor.
understand the table better. So, when the SZV of San Fernando City, La Union is 3% of the market value, what is that? If the market value is 100%, the SZV is 97%?
The
So it's very close?
SZV is zonal valuation.
Yeah. When we say when the entry is 3%,
It's
so
3% higher than the zone. The market value is 3% higher than the zonal valuation.
Oo.
the market value is 3% higher than the
Zonal valuation.
zonal valuation. So magkalapit sila.
Halos magkalapit
Yes,
na.
so in Calapan City, the market value is 216% higher than the zonal value.
valuation. So in that case,
So mga one-third siya.
yes.
Si zonal value,
But there are cases also, Mr. President, that the market value is lower than the zonal valuation. That's why
that
when
would be the negative
that would be the
figures.
negative. And that happens, Mr. President, also, depending on the situation and the transaction of the locality, in the locality.
No, I'm just asking, Mr. President, how to read or
Interpret,
understand
yeah.
the table.
Uh-uh.
So Cebu City,
Meron ba tayo?
schedule of zonal values, the market, Cebu City, the 99% means that the market value is 99% higher than the schedule of zonal value. Close
Yes.
to double, para ganon. Tama
Yes.
po ba yan? So, okay.
Yes.
So that's how we read the table, Mr. President.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct,
thank you
Mr.
for-
President.
Thank you, Mr. President and
Mr.
Minority
President,
Leader.
just to, in addition to that, in the revenue regulation of the BIR, no, Revenue Memorandum Order 31-2019, and this is the revised policy guidelines procedure in the establishment, revision of schedule of zonal values of real properties within the jurisdiction of the revenue district offices. One of the guidelines here, in letter C, records the most recent actual sales, transfers, exchanges of properties appearing in documents filed in public offices. For example, the BAR, the LRA, etc. So the zonal valuation captures the most recent actual sales or transaction in that area.
In that case, Mr. President, why is it that in the matrix that the good sponsor just showed, if the second column is the zonal value, and then the third column is the actual, the perceived or actual based on sales, they're of different values.
In the third column,
Yes po. In the previous slide, it shows 3 columns, yung local market value, then yung local zonal value, and then yung actual, no? Yung tama po ba?
Yes.
Yung the value of the
The market
actual
value,
sales.
yeah,
Opo.
yeah.
So, then, kasi earlier, the good, Mr. President, the good sponsor had a statement that I lost my train of thought.
I think the in the third column, what
Yes.
it shows is the actual transaction. For
Yes.
example, in the case of San Fernando City, the actual
Yes.
transaction there, the price is 6,700% higher than the schedule of market values of the local government.
Yes.
So that is the interpretation of that, Mr. President. But that's not always the case. We have the case, let's say, in Angeles City, it's only 138% of the schedule of market value. So it's much lower. So you can see the disparity. It really depends when the local governments update their schedule of market values. But if you don't update it regularly, you will see a big disparity. If you update it regularly, then it becomes more realistic and it becomes closer to the actual transaction that is happening in your locality.
And what this bill is trying to do, Mr. President, is to update
Yes.
those market values as the LGU might not have been doing so regularly.
Yeah. Only
Pero-
the market value, insofar as the market value is concerned. Just to
Yes.
update that, using standards.
Yes.
So that is the objective. So in other words, if I'm the local assessor, I'll be guided by standards on how to update the market values.
Mr. President, the Minority Leader would like to interject.
Just so that we will really understand the table being presented to us. Earlier, the sponsor read revenue regulation
Ayun, oo.
on how to determine the zonal value, the SZV,
CV.
that will be based on actual transactions involving real property. So where do we get market value?
In the same revenue regulation, there are different sources. Somebody sources. Here. The sources of documents can be in number 2, letter A. The 3 recommended values from the BIR, private appraisers, and the provincial, city, municipal assessors. So those are the sources of documents, Mr. President. Private appraisers can be...
So lumalabas si SZV based on actual transactions of the market.
Yes,
So yung market value,
as much as possible.
so yung market value lumalabas na projections or estimates or studies, not based on actual transactions.
Actually, in their policy guidelines, in number 1, letter C, they should use the recent actual sales, transfers, exchanges of properties appearing in documents filed in public offices such as BIR and LRA. So, and they can
So,
also use the private appraisers, Mr. President.
So if that is the case, Mr. President, dapat yung column natin ng SZV versus market value, dapat tabla yan.
Correct,
Mr.
correct. Tama, Mr. President. Tama. But I think in some cases, for example, it really depends also how often the BIR, local BIR updates their zonal valuation. It also depends on the situation. For example, in that area, bumaha, no? And there's a recent transaction because people want to get out and they sold their property at a very low rate. That will be captured and put in the schedule of zonal valuation. No? So that's why, Mr. President, and I'm sure the good minority leader knows this, the basis for payment of capital gains is zonal valuation or actual transacted price, whichever is higher. No? There's a floor because there are cases also that they undervalue the transaction. No? So there's a floor in terms of the amount of capital gains that you will be paying.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to the good minority leader. Mr. President, maybe this slide, this table, was too complicated for my question because each column is comparing two different values and pegs the percentage difference between them.
Yeah.
Pero anywhere in that table or anywhere in the 3 sets of data that the good sponsor used, Mr. President, would we be able to see, yun, I'm just going back to my original question, yung average percentage increase na posibleng makita natin in terms of the official real estate valuations?
We, well, Mr. President, I think to answer that, we have to look at all the 200 LGUs? 228 LGUs and their declared schedule of market value versus zonal valuation. So, but to put it simply, Mr. President, to put it simply, just to have some form of idea, if we are going to based on this table, if we are going to update all the local market values or local schedule of market values of those 10 local government units and put them at least near the zonal valuation of the BIR, the increase on the average is about 1,557%, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
But then again, the caveat there is this is just 10 of the 228 LGUs. The other LGUs might be updated. The other LGUs might be more aggressive in terms of updating their market value. So the caveat there is this is just 10 of the, I think this is the top 10 disparity in terms of market values and zonal valuation. But we have to look at the entire 228 local government units.
Fair enough, Mr. President. But of course,
But, and we'll compute
Mr.
that, and
President.
we'll in the next interpolation we'll share it with the good gentle lady from Akbayan on that number.
thank you, good sponsor. And as I said, fair enough kung this is just a sampling of the top 10 LGUs or cities displaying disparities. But still, kung they're all cities, so they're probably among the more developed of our LGUs. Even if they might be outliers in terms of the average, still, or in terms of percentages, but still, in terms of an average percentage, mataas po yung 1,557.
That's why, Mr. President, we need to I keep on emphasizing that in this formula, slide 2, there are 3 variables that the local governments need to determine. No? The market value is just one variable. No?
Okay.
The assessment level and the tax rate is another two variables that they can control. That's under the ambit of the local governments to determine what is the appropriate tax level depending on the local situation and what's the appropriate tax rate that they want to impose, again, depending on their local situation. And that will dictate the tax due, the amount of taxes that a constituent will pay.
Thank you, Mr. President, good sponsor. I do understand, isa lang ito sa 3 variables. This is only one of 3 variables that will be affected by the bill. But of course, in any mathematical equation, you change one variable, there will be an effect. Opo,
That's
in the
true. That's
overall
why
computation.
the important it's important to note that the local governments should also look at the other 2 variables, and if depending again on their decision, they can lower down the assessment levels and the tax rate because there's a ceiling for those 2 variables, but there's no floor, or the floor is 0 basically.
Thank you, Mr.
Actually,
President.
the floor is not 0; it can go 0.00, beyond.
Beyond, lower. Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
President.
yeah. The floor is 0, and I have to yield to the math
mathematician.
wizard of our chamber. Yes, 0 is the floor.
Yes. Thank you, good sponsor. Well, Mr. President, right now we're talking about at
Zero
least
is negative.
2 stakeholders who would be affected by this bill. I'll return to the question about homeowners, about whom I began my interpellation, and ask the one now about LGUs. No? So at its heart, this is a revenue measure. Ano po yung projection para sa additional income na matatanggap ng mga LGUs kung maipasa na natin itong panukala, Mr. President?
Scenario 1, no? Okay. Mr. President, in the simulation that the BLGF sent us, this is on slide 34, at the very minimum, the revenue that can be collected is about 18 billion. No? We'll
18 billion all over the country.
All over, we'll flash it on the
Mr.
slide.
President. Slide 34.
Yeah. But again, the caveat here, Mr. President, is assuming that the local government will uh, will touch on their assessed value and touch on their tax rate. But if, for example, all local governments agrees that they want a status quo in terms of tax due, it can be zero. It can be zero increase.
So ibig sabihin nga, as the minority leader was also saying, ibig sabihin, kailangan galawin din ng LGU yung dalawa pang factors.
Yes, depending on, but we will not, that really depends on the sanggunian and the local government. No? But conservatively, about 18 billion. No?
Excuse me, Mr. President. So conservatively, about 18 billion. Pero yun na nga, kung yung dalawang factors pa gagalawin ng LGUs, then this would be a revenue neutral
Yes,
bill
yes,
in effect.
correct. That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, the draft law states that if the sanggunian, so ito yung dagdag ko pang mga tanong tungkol sa LGUs, if the sanggunian fails to pass an ordinance setting the appropriate assessment levels and tax rates, so yung dalawa pang factors, within 60 days, the existing ordinance on assessment levels and tax rates shall remain in force and effect. Kaya, kung yung market values para sa real property sa buong bansa tumaas, baka nga dramatically, pero sa anumang dahilan, may ilang mga sanggunian na hindi nila ma-update yung dalawang factors pa, yung assessment levels at yung tax rates sa loob ng 60-day period provided, kung meron man, ano yung likely effect sa real estate tax payments? So related din siguro dun sa 18B or 0 na pinag-usapan natin kanina, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, what we want the sanggunian is to approve a revenue code so that they will update the schedule of market values, but we will not dictate what assessment levels and what tax rates they want to impose on their locality. So a scenario there is they will approve an ordinance, but they will dramatically lower down their assessment level, and also their tax rates. No? So what we are after is to update the schedule of market values, Mr. President. So that's what the effect of this provision, Mr. President.
Salamat, Mr. President. So, posibleng dun sa mga sanggunian na yon or sa mga jurisdiction ng mga sanggunian na yon, walang pagbabago sa real estate tax payments.
Yes,
pero
Mr.
ma-update
President.
yung revenue codes nila.
Yes, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I would like to share with the body. We ran simulations in Valenzuela just to show to the body what the sanggunian can do. Like for example, in slide 10, Mr. President, we'll just so I asked our local assessor to run some simulations there. So on slide 10. Slide 10. Slide 10, slide 10. On slide 10, this is the actual RPT collection in Valenzuela. So currently, our assessment level is at 50%, and then our tax rate is at 2.5%. And if you look at the unit value, is at 6,000. No? So there are some areas in Valenzuela where it's admittedly it's not updated, but this is the current assessment level and tax rates being imposed in Valenzuela. And if you look at the tax due, let's just test the first row. it's 12,200 pesos. So that's the tax due of a taxpayer owning a 150 square meter lot valued at 6,000. So assuming we update the market value in that area. So we'll go to slide 11. So in the same area, we update it based on the most recent transaction, slide 11. Yan. So the market value will go from 6,000 to 60,000. No? But the local government can lower down the assessment level from 50% to 5%, and not touch the tax rate. It will only touch the assessment level. If you look at the tax due, the RPT due, it's the
Pareho
same.
lang.
No, 11,250. So there are several ways that the local governments can tweak in order to get an end result of the same tax due, Mr. President. So that's the dynamic. So we're just shifting, because right now, to be from based on my experience as a former local chief executive, the normal mentality of local government unit is not to update the market values of the properties there, and maintain the assessment level and maintain the tax rate. So we're changing that mindset by updating their market values, but they can also lower down their assessment levels. No? So this is just one example, Mr. President, one simulation that we ran in order to demonstrate that the tax due is the same, no? Or the RPT is the same, because they lower down dramatically their assessment level from 50% to 5%.
Salamat, Mr. President. At salamat, good sponsor, for mentioning yung tungkol sa normal mentality ng mga LGUs. Kasi yun din yung isang pinaka-curious ako tungkol sa bill na ito at yung implications niya sa mga LGUs, for example. Kasi yung tanong ko doon ay, paano ba talaga nagbe-behave ang LGUs given yung ganitong klaseng bill, at kung paano niya kailangang ipatupad siya in each jurisdiction. So kung itataas through BIR yung unang value, no, yung schedule of market values, pero mananatili sa control ng LGUs yung assessment at saka yung tax rate, assessment level at saka tax rate, what would make one LGU hold the two other variables constant? What would make another LGU raise them? What would make another LGU lower them? Para sa ibang LGU, ganda, pareho lang yung RPT, kahit na na-update yung revenue code. Pero sa ibang LGUs, kung iba yung maging behavior nung sanggunian or ng local chief executive, ano yung magiging epekto? Kasi on its face lang, baka yung unang tanong ng mga mamamayan natin na tayo nagbabayad ng RPT, ng amilyar, ay hindi ba ang maaasahan natin mas mataas na real estate taxes on the average? Pag tinanong po ako ng ganyan, good sponsor, paano ko sasagutin na yes, we can expect higher real estate taxes on the average, or no, we don't have to expect that?
No, my direct answer is no.
No.
There can be, this is my conversation with our local government in Valenzuela.
Opo.
Because the updating of revenue code, no, especially market values, assessment levels, and tax rates, politics actually dictate
Yes.
quite heavily on those decisions. No? And traditionally, I've seen this with many local governments, no, that they do not touch the market values, but instead they raise the assessment levels. No?
Okay.
That's the traditional way of coming up with their tax collections, or their RPT collections. We will just change that mindset, meaning let's make our market values realistic, because we can see that almost 1,000% difference. Let's make that realistic. but you still have the power to lower down the assessment value to a point that you can reach status quo, or you can actually reach even much lower, no? depending on the situation. And typically, local governments they think of many things, no, before they make on those decisions. No, politics plays a very big role, of course. Local situation also plays a very big role. For example, if it's a calamity-prone area, or it just recently experienced disasters, those decisions come into play, Mr. President. So, admittedly, we will need to change the mindset, but the powers remain the same, meaning the powers to lower down tax dues, coming up with status quo tax dues, or even higher tax dues, those powers still remain in the hands of the local governments.
Okay. Salamat, Madam President. This is quite a social experiment, ha? Good sponsor. Opo. Ngayon
Well,
ko mas na-appreciate, na-realize, pero medyo na-challenge din po
Yeah,
ako
yeah.
considering it. Kasi usually pag nagpapasa po tayo ng mga batas, alam natin na may cultural change din embedded
Yeah.
dyan para sa mga mamamayan.
Yeah.
Ito naman, revenue measure na usually para sa atin, figures lang, numbers,
Yeah.
no? Pero meron palang implication nito sa pagbabago ng, ano ba yan, financial management behavior ng mga LGUs natin. Kasi kumbaga, sa batas na ito, pipilitin natin sila through their new revenue code, baguhin yung, o at least i-acknowledge, i-recognize na iba yung market value. Pero sasabihan natin sila na pwede namang wag niyong galawin or ibaba niyo yung assessment level at saka yung tax rate na maaring on each of those three variables before, iba ang behavior nila to achieve a certain outcome. So it's very interesting, Madam President,
Mr.
good
Pres-
sponsor to say the least.
Yes, Mr.
Opo.
President, it does. And the whole essence of, even in the local government code, it calls for fair market value. Meaning, what is the fair market value in that area? And of course, there are many models that you can use to determine that, no? And that's in the Philippine valuation standards. But the most basic principle of fair market value is what is the most recent transaction in that area? What is the most recent construction or joint venture that valued that property? And that's what's required in the local government code. But because local governments do not update their schedule of market value, it's not, the fair market value is not realistic anymore. No, it's almost, I mentioned earlier, almost 1,557% less than the zonal valuation of the BIR. So it's not realistic anymore. So we want to make it realistic to reflect the real market value in that area. But the local government still controls what to impose on to their local constituents. And that, again, that decision will remain with the local government units, depending on the situation.
Salamat, Madam President, good sponsor. As a last point on how interesting this bill is, even more interesting than when we first studied it, so pwede palang, in that aspect, pwede palang i-consider itong bill na companion measure sa local government code.
Yes, Mr. President, it does.
Opo.
It's a companion measure, Mr. President.
Okay. Then again, the minority leaders also saying na it actually repeals certain provisions or some provisions of the local government code. So I guess progressive legislation then, if not exactly a companion measure, some kind of progressive legislation with mga assumptions dun sa mga studies, halimbawa na ginawa ng good sponsor of overseeing or evaluating how the local government code has been implemented.
Yes.
As far as itong usapin ng real estate taxes is concerned. Madam President, good sponsor, sponsor, paano kung yung sanggunian hindi siya nakapagpasa ng bagong tax ordinance sa loob ng period provided?
Nasaan yung kahapon? Anong penalty? You mean what penalty?
Or ano pong mangyayari? Ano pong magiging epekto kung within the period provided, hindi naman magtatagumpay yung sanggunian sa pagpasa ng bagong tax ordinance?
The existing
It
the
remains
existing
in force
revenue
and
code
effect.
will still be in effect.
Okay po, salamat.
The tax ordinance, the
Madam
existing
President.
tax ordinance and the revenue code
Okay
will
po.
be still in effect.
Okay po. Huling tanong ko tungkol sa LGUs bago ako dumako sa homeowners or potential homeowners. Yung possibility ba ng pag-suspend ng paggamit ng new valuations hanggang ma-update ng mga sanggunian yung tax levels nila at yung tax rates nila, na-consider po ba ito, Madam President?
Let me repeat the question. If
Yes,
there's
po.
any suspension of the tax rate?
Was the possibility of suspending the use of the new valuations until after the sanggunian is able to update the tax levels and update the tax rates, was this considered?
Suspending the parang goes hand in hand. The question is if we consider that suspending the implementation of the schedule of market values before an ordinance?
Or until after the sanggunian is able to update their tax levels and tax rates?
Okay, yeah. Well, Mr. President, we can study that proposal, Mr. President. The concept here is to, the basic concept here, no, just the basic concept is to update the market values,
Yes.
give it to the Sanggunian, and the Sanggunian enacts an ordinance. No? But the ordinance can be, like what I demonstrate, can be a lowered assessment value, thereby creating a status quo scenario. But what the bill intends to do is to update the scheduled market value and update the revenue ordinance accordingly. The revenue ordinance normally contains the market values, the assessment level, and the tax rate, the three variables. Yeah. Yeah, but we can study the suggestion of the good lady from Akbayan.
Thank you, good sponsor, Madam President. So, dako na po ako sa mga tanong ko, focused more on the homeowners.
Okay.
Apo. So,
Chair,
Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Yes,
if
Madam
I may, can I just interrupt with the indulgence of my two colleagues? We
Yes, Madam.
just have with us, Madam President, guest from the gallery who needs to go, and I just wanted to acknowledge them with the indulgence of my two colleagues, please.
Yes,
We have
Madam
with us Marion Kim Mangrobang, national athlete for triathlon and SEA Games, gold medalists. Fernando Jose Casares, national athlete for triathlon and SEA Games gold medalist, and Coach Annie De Leon Brown, triathlon coach, guest of this representation and guest of Senator Pia Cayetano. We just wanted to acknowledge them, Madam Chair, and to show, Madam Chair, that this Senate actually gives real importance to the national treasure of our country, our athletes. Maraming salamat po.
We welcome our guests to the Senate and congratulate them for the honor, for bringing honor to our country. Congratulations to our young guests.
Actually, Your Honor, believe it or not, in this late month of the year, Burr months na, they still have 6 international races to join before the year ends. So bugbugan pa rin ang kanilang training and competition. So thank you, Majority Floor Leader and Presiding Officer, for giving them the honor. We really, as the Majority Floor Leader
Please
say,
allow
in the
us
Senate, we
to,
really
yes, to welcome them. Thank you
recognize.
for putting it on record, and let us know how we can support our athletes more, not just through legislation, but actual finance. It's the budget hearings. I'm sure the good lady sponsor and our Majority Leader would know how to further give support to our athletes, what they rightfully deserve. So welcome to the Senate. Congratulations.
Mr. President, just a quick interjection. Mr. Casares hails from Valenzuela. He's our constituent. So he's a proud triathlete coming from the city of Valenzuela.
Then the gentleman from Valenzuela would take care of them, Madam President.
Yes, they should be taken care of. Congratulations.
Extra help.
Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished colleagues. Thank you, Senator Gatchalian,
We
Senator
proceed now.
Ontiveros. Please proceed, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam President, good sponsor, Majority Leader, and the gentle lady from Taguigan Pateros. I'm so happy for the interpellation to be interrupted also so we could greet Coach Annie, an old family friend. Mabuhay po. So just to continue, good sponsor, Madam President, with the questions relating more now to the homeowners. One other aspect is the effect of a sudden increase on land valuations on capital gains taxes, as well as taxes on transfers in general, such as donations, inheritances, and through inheritance. As the name implies, capital gains taxes should be imposed on the capital gain of a seller, essentially the difference between the price at which an asset was purchased and the price at which it was sold. However, under the current system, presumptive capital gains and documentary stamp taxes are imposed on the gross selling price of real property in the Philippines. This is likely in response to the prevalent practice of, as the good sponsor has said correctly, the practice prevalent of undervaluing real property in deeds of sale to reduce the amount of tax paid. So kung po may dramatic increase sa official valuations para sa real property, ano malamang yung magiging epekto sa tax burden para sa real estate sales at yung ibang transfers din tulad nga po nung pagmamana o kaya mga donasyon, Madam President.
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. And I'll flash slide number 4 because we can see here the schedule of zonal valuation in different areas. And it really depends, Mr. President. There are some areas where the market value is below the zonal valuation. There are some areas where the market value is higher than the valuation. But it really depends. But on the average, Mr. President, the zonal valuation is more or less responsive to the actual transacted price in that area. And that's because the BIR is mandated to use the most recent transaction, Mr. President. So if you look at the schedule of market value versus the market value, it's about 87%, meaning the market value is 80% more than the zonal valuation. So the tendency there is probably undervalue it so that you will just pay the zonal valuation. But the zonal valuation is placed there because, as what the good gentle lady mentioned, Her Honor mentioned, is the prevalence of undervaluing the transacted price. No? So it serves as a floor for capital gains tax, Mr. President. So in other words, my short answer to that is the increase might not be substantial, or because the difference is very low, and there are cases that the zonal valuation might even go down, no? depending on the situation.
Salamat, Madam President. But still, good sponsor, from LGU to LGU, sorry, nabalik tuloy sa LGU, but depending on the behavior of the LGU vis-a-vis those three variables o depende sa bagong revenue code na ipapasa ng sanggunian, the effect on the tax burden, magiging pareho lang whether sale ito o inheritance o donation. Tama po.
Yes, Mr. President. It's the capital gains tax is 6% over the market price, over the transacted price, gross selling price, Mr. President.
Alright po. So, still now more on homeowners again. So, paano po natin mapoprotektahan yung mga homeowners laban sa mga adverse effects ng sudden increase sa official valuations?
Well, Mr. President, my reaction to that, Mr. President, is the local governments will be responsive to the local clamor of their constituents. So meaning, if the local governments see that that there's no reason to increase the tax due of their constituents, then they can lower down the assessed value, assessed level. As what I have demonstrated, and this is also conferring with Valenzuela's assessor's office and also the local government there, that if this bill will push through, they will lower down the assessment level from 50% to 5%, so that there's status quo. No? So that's the effect of this proposal, Mr. President. So in other words, the local governments will probably respond in a way that they will maintain status quo of the tax due, Mr. President. That's my assumption, Mr. President.
Salamat, Madam President. So, good sponsor, isang halimbawa yun ng sinabi ninyo na political din
Yes.
yung calculus na gagamitin ng LGU. Paano niya exactly i-implement itong bill in relation also to the two other variables. At
Yes.
ibig din palang sabihin, kailangan may information campaign
Yes,
nito
correct.
sa mga
Yeah.
mamamayan para alam
Yeah.
nila, ops, pag didinigin na ng sanggunian itong bagong revenue code ng ating LGU, kailangan mag-participate tayo, kailangan sabihin yung positions ng mga homeowners associations, mga informal settlers, and other
Yes.
stakeholders in every
Yes.
LGU.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. President. That's why in the bill, in the updating of the market values, we specified explicitly that there will be 2 consultative meetings, public consultations conducted by the assessor in order to update the schedule of market values, Mr. President. And we can still tighten that, Mr. President, to improve information campaign and information dissemination, Mr. President.
Salamat, Madam President, good sponsor. Kanina lamang pinag-usapan natin yung mga homeowners. What about yung hindi pa nag-o-own ng home? Nangangarap pa lang, ambition pa lang nila. So, aspirational ito. So, paano natin masisigurado na yung high transfer taxes, hindi niya na mapipigilan yung mas maraming Filipino families na magmay-ari ng sarili nilang mga tahanan, Madam President?
Well, the transfer taxes, Mr. President, will be based on the that's more or less the capital gains tax, Mr. President. So, in my analysis, the zonal valuation is not so far off from the market value, Mr. President. So, the zonal valuation will still be used in this case, Mr. President. So, I don't think it will be I don't think the effects will be higher, Mr. President.
Salamat, Madam President, good sponsor. And I guess lalo na para dun sa mga pamilyang Pilipino who are in the lower socioeconomic brackets, lalong mahalaga, I mean, it's not touched on by the bill, pero lalong mahalaga magpatuloy lumawak yung ating mga social housing programs at maayos din yung financing ng
Yes.
mga iyon.
Yes, Mr. President.
Opo. Salamat. Madam President, good sponsor, bukod dun sa possibility ng pag-suspend ng paggamit nitong new valuations na sabi ng good sponsor pwedeng pag-aralan, ano pang measures pwede nating isama sa transition period para medyo swabe yung pagpasok ng market sa regime na ipatutupad nitong proposed measure, Madam President.
Well, Mr. President, I'll answer that in two ways. The first one, Mr. President, there's a provision here that empowers the local government to suspend the application of the schedule of market values. And let me just
Okay.
read it. No?
Apo.
In case of any significant change in market value where the property is located after the SMV has been approved and prior to the next revision, such as introduction of road right-of-way or similar infrastructure in times of calamities, disasters, whether man-made or natural, during a pandemic or a declared public health emergency, whether national or localized, and other analogous adverse circumstances where corrections of errors or inequalities in the SMV is deemed necessary, the provincial city assessor shall recommend revisions, meaning going down, to the existing SMV, to the BLGF regional office, and so on, Mr. President. So in other words, there is for example, there's a pandemic or there's a big disaster that happened in that area. The assessor can recommend to lower down the schedule of market values because obviously the values of that property will probably go down. No? The other one, Mr. President, is we can introduce probably a transitory mechanism, Mr. President, and we're open to suggestion from the good lady from Akbayan on some recommendations on a transitory mechanism.
Okay. Maraming salamat, good sponsor, Madam President, for that. Hindi lang pala pag-aaralan ni na good sponsor yung possibility of suspending the use of the new valuations sa early stage ng implementasyon nitong batas na ito. Pwede rin, may kapangyarihan din pala yung LGU given certain adverse circumstances or situations to temporarily suspend the application of these market values. And salamat dun sa pagiging bukas na makapag-introduce ng transitory mechanism. I'll certainly study that and probably propose an amendment at the proper time. So huli na lang, Madam President, good sponsor, huling tanong, balik ulit sa government, but this time not LGUs, more of national government. And in relation din, dun sa aspiration nga ng mga pamilyang Pilipino na magmay-ari ng sariling bahay. So, paano itong mga mas mataas, paano itong mga higher property valuations ay aapekto sa cost ng expropriating property para sa government projects, partikular kaugnay ng mga approved at saka ongoing projects. Naalala ko rin ito dahil binanggit ng good sponsor yung usapin ng road right of way, Madam President.
Ito ba yun? That's Mr. President, that's an excellent question. And this is actually one of the expropriation proceedings is one of the controversies that this bill aims to solve, Mr. President. And I have personal experience in this, Mr. President. There are two types of expropriation that happens in our country. One, binational, meaning DPWH. And the DPWH endeavors to come up with a fair value on the properties that they expropriate. And I think, if my understanding is correct, they use different methods. For example, they get appraisers, they use local government tax declarations, they also check the BIR zone evaluation. So they use several documents in order to determine what is fair in terms of value the properties that they are expropriating. That helps them determine the just compensation when DPWH expropriates the land. The problem comes in with local governments. And in RA 7160, which is the local government code, in section 19, and let me just read a portion of this. The local government unit may immediately take possession of the property upon the filing of expropriation proceedings and upon making a deposit with the proper court of at least 15% of the fair market value property based on the current tax declaration of the property being expropriated. So the fair market value is based on the tax declaration. So in other words, the local government can just deposit 50% based on the tax declaration and already take possession of the property. And this is where the problem comes in, because what we demonstrated earlier, most of the LGUs have very low fair market value in their tax declaration. So for example, I showed you in Valenzuela, it's only 6,000 in terms of tax declaration, but the actual transacted price there is already 60,000.
Yes.
So the local government will just use that 6,000, deposit 15%, and take possession of that property. Of course, that's advantageous to the local government unit because it's cheap. But it's not fair to the landowner because the value of their property in that area is already 60,000 pesos. The effect of that is we will have clogged regional trial courts because and I experienced this actually, we will file an expropriation case and we will fight it in court. So, and that can take very long. And normally they appoint 3 independent commissioners to determine the value. But of course, to determine the value can take years and years. No? So in short, it's advantageous to the local government unit, definitely. But the consequence of that is the courts will get busy because the case will be heard for a very long time. No? So this is one of the controversies that this bill aims to hopefully solve, no? Because now there will be one value. No? The tax declaration will be updated. It will be more or less in line with the market values, and the landowner will get his or her fair share in terms of proceeds from the expropriations.
Salamat, good sponsor, Madam President. So, itong bill din pala ay paraan para maiwasan yung clogging ng ating judiciary, pero magkaroon ng mas maayos na implementasyon sa executive side,
the local
simula
government.
sa LGUs.
Yeah.
Yes, particularly the local governments. Pero parang at every stage of the implementation of this law, may iba't ibang interest ng iba't ibang stakeholders ang kailangang balansehin, which goes back to my realization earlier, Madam President, good sponsor, na may pagka-social experiment din pala ito. And it's interesting to be able to conduct or participate in it using a revenue measure na I don't think madalas na nangyari dati or nangyayari.
Mr. President, just to
Yes.
go back to the previous question, Mr. President, on
Opo.
the transition, There's a saving clause here under Section 29, which is related to the transition, and let me read it. The schedule of market values, the SMVs, prepared by the provincial assessors, together with the municipal assessors and the city assessors, including the municipal assessors in Metro Manila and the assessor in the FIVIDEC, that have been approved by the respective sanggunian for real property taxation purposes, shall continue to be in force and effect until repealed. So in other words, Mr. President, if the local sanggunian will not do anything, it will still be, the previous SMBs will be, still
full
be in
effect
force.
and force. Oh, okay. So maraming salamat, Madam President, good sponsor, for
Within
Yes,
2 years
of course.
upon the effectivity of this act. So there's a
within
2-year transition.
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sige po.
Thank you for that question, Mr. President.
Yes, salamat ng marami, Madam President, and good sponsor for taking my questions and making the bill more interesting than I thought it was at the start, and for through the answers giving more inputs dun sa pag-aaralang possible amendments to be proposed. Salamat
Thank
po.
you, thank you.
Salamat.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ontiveros, and the sponsor, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Thank you,
Majority Leader.
Madam President. Madam President, this juncture, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2386. I so move, Madam
No
President.
objection, hearing none. The consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 21st session, Tuesday, September 12, 2023, and consider the same as approved.
No objection, hearing none. The reading of the journal is hereby dispensed with.
Thank
Please
you very
proceed.
much, Madam President. Madam President, with the consent of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2233. This is the Bill on Public-Private Partnership Act. I so move, Madam President.
Please proceed. Who is the sponsor of the measure?
Yes, Madam President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of individual amendments. With the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of individual amendments using the adopted substitute bill on August 30, 2023 as our working draft, and without prejudice to ask clarificatory questions on the said bill. I so move, Madam President.
Yes, please proceed. We are
Move.
in the period of individual amendments.
Yes, Madam President. At this juncture, I
and the
move that we
sponsor?
recognize the sponsor, Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Senator J.V. Ejercito is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. On page 1, we have no amendments, so we go to page 2. On section 2, the declaration of policy. On page 2, lines 10 to 11, delete in accordance with relevant laws, rules, and regulations. I so move, Madam President.
Adopted.
On section 3, on the availability of payments, on page 2, line 25, insert the acronym PPP after the word the and before the word contract. I so move, Madam President.
Any objection? Hearing none. It's adopted.
On section 3, on page 3, lines 9, delete the phrase "and which shall undertake" and replace with "that shall be responsible for." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, line 12, replace the word "and" to "any." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
And on the same page, lines 12, delete the phrase "with legal personality authorized under existing laws" and replace with "allowed and duly registered and licensed under Philippine laws." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 4, line 23, insert the word "hereby" before the word "authorized." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
And on the same page, line 24, insert the words "the provisions of" after the word "with" and before the word "this." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, line 26, replace the article "a" with "its." I so move, Madam President.
No objection? Hearing none. adopted.
On the same page, line 27, delete the phrase "and not a regulatory." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 5, line 4, add the word "strategies" after "capture." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 14, insert the acronym PPP before the word "contract." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 5, delete lines 23 to 25, starting with the word "which" until the word "end." I so move, Madam President.
Hearing none, no objection, adopted.
On the same page, line 25, insert the word "with" after the word "conferred" and before the word "the." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 5, line 31, after the word "which," insert the phrase "has submitted a bid in relation to a solicited project or a private sector entity which." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
Still on page 5, line 32 to page 6, line 1, delete the phrase "or a bid submission in relation to a solicited project." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 6, lines 28 to 29, delete starting with the comma after the word "partner" until the word "operator." On the same page, line 31, delete the word "total." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, line 2, insert a period after the word "cap," then insert the paragraph. Subsidy shall also include viability gap funding, or VGF, which may be extended by the government to make an economically viable revenue-based PPP project financially viable, provided that government payments for now, resettlement, and exemption from real property taxes shall not be considered as VGF. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, line 7, delete the phrase starting from proposal until the end of line 9 and replace with proposal made by a private proponent to undertake a PPP project pursuant to Section 10 of this Act. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, delete the entire item following the proposed consolidation with the definition of subsidy. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, delete lines 26 to 28. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 8, delete lines 1 to 10, starting with the word "where" until the word "agreement" in line 10 and replace with "as defined in this Act." I so move, Madam
No
President.
objection, hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 24, after the word "act," insert a comma and the phrase "or as may be approved by the appropriate approving body." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 25, delete the word "the" before the word "infrastructure." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
And on the same page, line 26, delete the phrase "through the design and build scheme." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 9, line 2, delete the words "the" and "end." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 9, line 20, insert the article "the" before the word "regional" and after the acronym RDCs. Insert the phrase "concerned, comma, the local sanggunian concerned." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 9, delete lines 29 to 30. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 10, line 32, add the word GAA after the word "act." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 11, line 2, delete the phrase "General Appropriations Act" and replace with the acronym GAA. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
Still on page 11, line 22, add letter S in the word "council" and add the acronym LDCs. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
On page 12, line 10, replace the word "and" to "or." I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
Still on page 12, line 12, after the phrase "prior" to add the phrase "endorsement of the LDC concerned" and. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none, adopted.
Still on page 12, line 17, delete the phrase "RDCs for PPP projects with proposed national government undertakings and or those that affect national and sectoral development plans, and replace with LDCs, number 1, LDCs for local PPP projects to be implemented by LGUs, semicolon, and of the, number 2, RDCs for PPP projects with proposed government undertakings using national government funds, comma, and / or those that affect national or sectoral development plans. I so move, Madam President.
Before we finalize this, I am sure it is just a typographical error, the spelling of government. So we just ensure that it's correctly spelled, yes, without the R. Thank you. No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Still on page 12, line 20, insert the phrase LDCs and or after the word of. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
Still on page 12, line 25, at the words and LDCs after RDCs. I so move, Madam
No
President.
objection, hearing none. Adopted.
Finally, on page 12, line 32 to page 13, line 1, delete the phrase pursuant to Republic Act number 7160 or the Local Government Code of 1991. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 13, line 13, delete the phrase issued by the NEDA Board -ICC. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, line 14, insert the phrase to the preferred risk allocation after the word deviations. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
Still on page 13, line 16, insert the phrase head of the before the word implementing. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, lines 19 to 20, delete the phrase starting with the word upon until the word requirements and replace with upon submission of complete. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, delete lines 23 to 26, starting with the word in after the acronym PTCS and replace with considering the nature and complexity of the PPP project. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 13, lines 28 and 32, insert the acronym PPP before the word contract. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 14, delete lines 1 to 17, replace with the decision of the appropriate approving body shall be rendered in writing within 120 calendar days from receipt of complete requirements. The failure of the appropriate approving body to render its decision on the project within the specified period shall be deemed an approval thereof, and the implementing agency concerned may proceed with the procurement of the PPP project without prejudice to any liability that the erring or negligent officials or employees may incur under this Act and other existing laws. To facilitate the expedient processing of national and local PPP projects requiring NEDA Board and NEDA Board-ICC actions, meetings of such body shall be held monthly unless no projects are set for review or evaluation. Letter E, the NEDA Board-ICC in the case of national PPP projects and the PPP Governing Board in the case of local PPP projects shall formulate guidelines, forms, and templates that shall be used by the implementing agency and the appropriate approving body in reviewing and approving the PPP project. The NEDA Board-ICC shall also formulate guidelines on the approval of government undertakings using national government funds for local PPP projects. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 14, line 23, delete the word deliberate after the word the. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 14, line 29, insert the acronym PPP before the word contract. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
On page 15, line 4, replace the phrase if there is a with the word for. I so move, Madam President.
No objection, hearing none. Adopted.
Still on page 15, insert as a new last paragraph of section 8, if the executed PPP contract contains provisions which are contrary with the approved PTCs and are grossly disadvantageous to the government, the contract shall be null and void without prejudice to the provisions under Section 32 of this Act. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 15, line 13, insert the word public before the word bidding. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 15, lines 25, 30, and 32, insert the acronym PPP before the word contract. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 15, line 31, delete the phrase may proceed to consider and replace with shall award the PPP contract to. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 16, delete lines 1 to 4 and replace with in case the PPP contract is awarded to the next most responsive bidder, the implementing agency without prejudice to the remedies provided by law can forfeit the bid security, withdraw the award, or pursue any other remedies allowed under existing rules and regulations against the winning bidder who failed to comply with any post-award requirements. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 16, line 18, insert the acronym PPP before the word contract. I so move, Madam President.
No objection. Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 17, replace lines 8 to 13 with the phrase upon receipt of an unsolicited proposal, an implementing agency may either, number 1, reject the proposal if such proposal is deemed inconsistent with the development plans of the implementing agency, or if the implementing agency is already developing a project with a similar scope and slash or similar objective, or number 2, decide to process such proposal, in accordance with the requirements set forth in this section. An unsolicited proposal, which an implementing agency decides to process pursuant to subsection A and 2 above, shall be evaluated for completeness, provided that, unsolicited proposals requiring approval of the NEDA board or the NEDA board-ICC shall be submitted to the PPP Center for determination of completeness. In such cases, the PPP Center shall thereafter endorse the complete unsolicited proposals to the appropriate implementing agency. The determination of completeness shall be conducted within 10 calendar days upon receipt of the unsolicited proposal. All unsolicited proposals that are determined to be incomplete shall be returned to the private proponent by the implementing agency or the PPP Center as the case may be. If the unsolicited proposal is determined to be complete, the implementing agency may, number 1, continue processing the unsolicited proposal in accordance with subsection D of this section, or number 2, decide to bid out the proposal as a solicited project, pursuant to section 9 of this Act. In all the cases contemplated above, the implementing agency shall state in writing with corresponding justification the action it decides to take on the unsolicited proposal.
The sponsor, with the permission of the sponsor, may we suspend session? There are questions about the numbering.
Yes.
I would like to request a sponsor to clarify with the Secretariat. It would be difficult if we speak this way, just so that we see the numbering.
The numbering.
So that
Yes, we'll just
we
confirm.
stop there first. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Yes.
Session suspended.
Yes, Mr.
Please
President.
proceed with your amendments, Senator JV.
Yes, just to continue before the suspension. In all the cases contemplated above, comma, the implementing agency shall state in writing with corresponding justification the action it decides to take on the unsolicited proposal, period. If, just, if the implementing agency fails to act on an unsolicited proposal, 3 calendar days after the end of the detailed evaluation period, comma, the project proposal shall be deemed rejected, comma, without prejudice to any liability that the erring or negligent officials or employees may incur under this act and/or existing laws. The decision of the implementing agency on the unsolicited proposal shall be deemed final and non-appealable. But, Mr. President, just to clarify before I move for its adoption, on page 17, starting from the word unsolicited, with the following, and then the next, and then the whole paragraph. I so move, Mr. President.
I did not understand that, but subject to style, there being no
Yes, subject to
objection.
style. Just to clarify, Mr.
Amendment is
President.
adopted. Make sure we have a clean copy of what you had just said.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
On page 17, between lines 13 and 14.
In your amendment page, which kasi walang page ito mga amendments mo eh. So on your, is it section 11 on joint venture? Which
Yes.
part are we now in?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. President.
We're already on section 11 joint venture. Okay. Huh? Section 10. Pero joint venture. Unsolicited proposals. Session suspended. Which part of Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. President, again, that's section 10 on joint venture, on page 17. Let me correct that, sir. Section 10, unsolicited proposals. On page 17, between lines 13 and 14, insert a new subsection, subsection B, special requirements. Number 1, unsolicited proposal involving raw acquisition, whether owned or not owned by the original proponent, may be considered. Colon, provided, comma, that the submission includes our right of way ba to? Yung ROW.
Yes, my dear colleague, my dear distinguished sponsor, yours, page 17, but different lines as from what we are reading. Is it the same as what we are reading, you are reading? Because you're giving different lines. And I think it was also observed by the minority leader.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah,
it will-
by the deputy minority leader. The text is right, but the lines are wrong. Yes, Deputy Minority Floor Leader Rizon Taveros. Yes.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President. And also, good sponsor, the section number and the subject. Because what I'm reading of section 11 is joint venture, but the reference is to section 10, unsolicited proposal.
Yes, session suspended. I would like to make a proposal to to our dear sponsor to suspend consideration first of the amendments until we can get the correct page, line numbers, in order in your proposed amendments, Your Honor. At the same time, if you can put numbers as well on your page numbers on your amendment pages, yung ginagamit po natin to amend the measure. Yeah, so that's why I was confused earlier when I mentioned, and I have a comment from the minority floor leader. I shouldn't have said I did not understand. I didn't understand because
The number.
you were reading the number and my page had a different number, my amendment page. So, or my amendment guide didn't have the same numbers. So maybe we can suspend consideration, Majority Leader, so that they can come up with a better master
Improved
list of
copy.
amendments with the right corresponding page, line, number.
I cannot
etc.
agree more, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
And
So,
I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2233. So move, Mr. President.
yeah, so we will just leave it at that, the
Yes.
last amendment, then we will
Yes.
continue once
At
everything
least
is
we accomplished
cleaned up. Yes.
one-third, probably.
Maybe more than one-third.
More than one-third, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion's approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished colleagues. Thank you, Senator J.B. Ercito. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Committee Report number 120 on Senate Bill number 2439. This bill pertains to the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion's approved. We ask yes, or will you move for its consideration?
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2439 under Committee Report number 120. So move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion. We ask the Secretary now to read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2439, an act institutionalizing the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System, mandating its use in policy and decision-making, designating the agencies responsible for its implementation, providing institutional arrangements among responsible agencies, and appropriating funds therefore.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we recognize the distinguished sponsor, may I just move for a minute suspension to allow our technical people to prepare the presentation of our Senate President pro tempore.
Yes, session suspended for 1 minute.
Mr. President.
We have already
Yes, Mr. President, to
Open the period
sponsor,
of sponsorship,
yes, to sponsor the measure, Mr. President, may we recognize our Senate President pro tempore, Senator Loren Legarda, the chairperson of the subcommittee on PENCAS law under the Committee on Economic Affairs, to deliver the sponsorship
our
speech.
distinguished resident environmentalist and Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda, is recognized.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is under the Committee on Economic Affairs, and so this speech is not only about the environment, which is very, very important. It's not simply about climate, but it is about our economic affairs and our life as a nation. Ginoong Pangulo at mga kagalang-galang na kasamahan, magandang araw o gabi na rin. Payagan ninyo akong magpaliwanag sa paraang mauunawaan ng mas marami. Inaanyayahan ko kayong isipin ang pangkababaihang kwentuhan, katapat ng kwentong barbero, pero may pinagkakaabalahan. Naglalaba sa sapa o nagsusulsi habang binabantayan ang mga bata. Sabi nga ni Senate President, mahirap intindihin yan, PENCAS. Ano ba ito? Kaya sisimplihan ko po para maintindihan, hindi lamang ng mga mababatas, kundi ang Pilipinong makikinabang. Ang kwentuhan ay kung paano nalalamang kumikita ang kanilang maliliit na negosyo. Sabi ng isa, mabuti na lamang at hindi na sila umuupa. Malaking bawas sa gastusin, kaya kumikita ang tindahan. Sabi ng pangalawa, mabuti na lamang at tumutulong ang panganay. Malaking ginhawa kung may ibang kailangang gawin. Sabi ng pangatlo, mabuti na lamang at naibenta ang tanim na gulay. Malaking bawas sa puhunan. Sabi ng pang-apat, mabutit hindi ako pumayag na putulin ng barangay ang puno sa may tindahan. Kung hindi, ay hindi makakayanan ng init at kailangan magsara ng tindahan sa tanghali. Ito po ang mga halimbawa ng hindi natin kinikwenta sa maliit na negosyo at maihahambing rin sa ekonomiya ng ating bansa. Marami sa nakagiginhawa, sa nakababawas ng pagkalugi, at sa nakapagpapatuloy ng mga serbisyong pampubliko ay hindi po nabibilang. Sa national accounting, kabilang dyan ang mga taong tumutulong batay sa sariling kagustuhan at ang mga kaugnayan. Ang nakabahaging halaga na nagbibigay daan sa mga individual na magtulungan upang epektibong makamit ang isang karaniwang layunin ay tinatawag na social capital. Kabilang din ang mga bunga ng kalikasan na napakikinabangan gaya ng mga biyaya ng lupa, prutas, gulay, kanlong ng mga puno, pati na rin siguro yung asin na binigay ko sa inyo galing sa Albuquerque, Bohol, yung tibuok, at saka yung buyo na galing sa Botolan, Zambales. Mga biyaya ng ating karagatan. Nariyan din ang mga proseso ng kalikasan na maaring intangible, ngunit may tuturing namang isang puhunan. Ang kalinisan ng tubig at hangin, dulot ng pagsasala ng lupa, paglilinis ng hangin, dulot ng paglago ng mga puno at halaman, ang pagtupok ng lamok ng mga tutubi at paniki ay maituturing naman na natural capital. Kapag hindi natin binibigyang halaga ang natural na yaman, maaaring dahan-dahang nalulugi na ang bayan nang hindi natin namamalayan. At alam natin ito sa pag-aabuso sa kapaligiran at kalikasan ng maraming lugar. Kaya nung pagsara ng Boracay, alam nyo, nung maraming, how many years ago, na Kailangan natin isara dahil nga naabuso masyado at ganyan sa maraming lugar, hindi lamang sa Pilipinas, kundi sa mundo. As you can see, Mr. President, you need imagination to appreciate natural capital. The reason it is hard to capture and explain is that it is tied up not just with actual stocks, fruits, vegetables, timber, mines, but also with the invisible relationships and processes, benefits, and services. We need to account for the food chain, understand what eats what in the ecosystem, to be able to appreciate the services that the plants and animals provide in the food web. We need to see entire ecosystems to appreciate that the thriving of the coral reefs is due to the ground cover of the upland soils by vegetation, and that without the vegetation preventing erosion, the coral reefs will choke on silt. We need to appreciate that as maligned as snakes are in the Bible and in our normal lives, their predation of small mammals reduces the spread of viruses brought by rodents due to the antiviral properties of snake venom. And there is so much we still do not know and understand of the services that nature gives us. Unfortunately, what we do not know, we have failed to value, and we have failed to account for it, resulting in our lack of understanding of what we are gaining or losing. Knowing these values and accounting for them will change the way we interact with nature and hopefully increase our consciousness about our shared wealth. Our behaviors and practices will be informed by the knowledge that they have direct impacts on the economy and our national budgets, and therefore in what we can expect from government. For instance, knowing about the costs of pollution cleanup and lost resources due to waste can help reduce our damaging behaviors. We can expect better planning and spending by government and prevent wastage of public funds and recognize ecosystem services as part of social services. Kapag alam natin kung ano at gaano ang ikinalulugi ng ating ekonomiya, naniniwala akong magtutulungan tayong kumilos ng tama, magdesisyon ng tama. Up to the typhoons of this year, not just in the Philippines, but you see the flooding in many other countries of the world. We have accounted for billions in agriculture losses in the Philippines, but do not have figures for the damaged ecosystems to which they belong, when those very ecosystems will be the source of restoration and rehabilitation of agricultural systems. And if I may mention what Secretary Bonoan told me last night and whispered loudly in my ear, he said, "Senator, it is beyond engineering solutions that is happening in our country. We need to protect the environment. We need to save our forests and our mountains. And it goes beyond engineering solutions to be able to solve the many calamities and the floods and many other problems." And he would probably say that in our budget hearings. Restoration must use economic indicators that value more than just the incomes and ignore the destruction of our natural capital in supporting agriculture, generating revenues, and calculating what we risk losing if we do not invest in protection and resilience, or sadly, what is actually lost. As we face an age of changing climate and unprecedented biodiversity loss, the challenge is how we can use our vulnerability as an opportunity to examine the role and impact of natural resources on the economic growth of a developing nation such as the Philippines. Sa madaling salita, itama na po natin ang kwentahan ng nakikita ng malinaw ang kalikasan, kung ano ang halaga nito at kung ano ang nawawala, kung bulag nga tayo rito. I could say this is probably the best time to institute this commonsensical approach to managing our national patrimony. But the true best time would have been when I first filed the Philippine Economic, Environmental, and Natural Resources Accounting PINRA bill in 2007 when I was a young second-term senator. We would have realized then what we have, what we stood to lose, the damage we stood to suffer, and we would have planned and invested accordingly. So it's been 15 years since the first time I've had it. The UN has been working on institutionalizing this concept and values for many years, starting with the SEEA, Central Framework, adopted in 2012. In 2019, the United Kingdom's Treasury commissioned Sir Partha Dasgupta to produce a report on the economics of biodiversity for their national accounts. The report issued in 2021 begins with the assertion that nature is a blind spot in economics and that we can no longer afford for it to be absent from our accounting systems that dictate national finances or ignored by economic decision makers. In the same year, the United Nations adopted the system of environmental economic accounting, SEA, officially ensuring international recognition and reducing our blindness. Mr. President, this bill responds to the loud call of the times. It provides indicators that will integrate the concerns of nature in planning, policymaking, and budgeting, adopts the international standards under SEA, and ensures interagency coordination to link natural capital information with the performance of agency mandates. The bill's declaration of policy includes the recognition of natural ecosystems as an integral part of our patrimony and heritage, ensuring that our economy opens its eyes and reduces its blinders. The bill defines natural capital as a stock of renewable and non-renewable resources, including plants, animals, air, water, soil, ores, minerals, that provide a flow of benefits to people and living things. Natural capital includes, but is not limited to, ecosystem services such as air and water filtration, flood protection, carbon sequestration, pollination of crops, and habitats for wildlife. We can calculate provisioning services, the fruits and harvest from nature, regulating services, the cleaning power of soil to water, of trees to air, the temperature control provided by plants, as well as protective services of mountains and watersheds, cultural services, the meanings and values of our resources, guiding lifestyle, intellectual and social development, aesthetics, and supporting services, like the natural processes of photosynthesis that give us all our nourishment. Measuring these services will open our eyes to the true value of nature and everything she does for us. By institutionalizing a Philippine ecosystem and natural capital accounting system, PENCAS, we hope to integrate environmental inputs and outputs in the determination of national income accounts to reflect a more accurate state of development and economic performance of the country. In addition to the gross national product and other usual indicators, our citizens will be informed of nature's contribution to the economy. Our bill shall ensure that we have a list of officially designated statistics on the depletion, degradation, and restoration of natural capital, environmental protection, expenditures, pollution and the quality of land, air and water, environmental damage, and adjusted net savings. We have named relevant departments to ensure the generation of the necessary data on natural capital, DNR, DA, DOE, but also use them in decision-making and teach the means for their generation and usage. We have included mandates for the Department of Education and relevant agencies, the Professional Regulation Commission, the DOF, the DSUHD Housing, the DILG, to enhance the use of natural capital indicators in their work. the National Economic and Development Authority, NEDA, adopted a roadmap to institutionalize natural capital in 2021 during the pandemic for natural capital accounting. The bill mandates NEDA to include NCA in national and regional development priorities based on the usefulness of the accounts in policy analysis, development planning, and investment programming. The Philippine Statistics Authority is designated in the bill to oversee PENCA's implementation and create the Environment, Natural Resources, and Ecosystem Account, the NREAS, under their Sectoral Statistics Office. The PSA's expertise and capabilities make them well-suited to guide the integration of PENCAS into our bureaucratic systems, facilitating successful implementation and accurate reporting of natural capital accounts. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources will ensure that the lessons from its WAVES projects are institutionalized in its programs to generate natural capital data to the PSA, and the bill requires them to expand data generation on NCA. I have every confidence that what these agencies have done previously, namely NEDA's roadmap, PSA's task force on natural capital accounts, and the DNR's initiatives, have set the stage to launch and execute the system fully and comprehensively when legislated. But to ensure that these agencies comply and get as much participation as possible, we have instituted mechanisms that require public consultations. We also included a provision that gives any citizen the standing to compel the performance of any of the mandates under this act and to seek justification from any government agency that may have ignored or neglected PENCAS accounts and indicators in their policy or decision-making. There is always the possibility that natural capital accounts can be used just to value what can be extracted and feign ignorance of all the accompanying processes. This will perpetrate our natural or our nature blindness and lead to the destruction of ecosystems. To prevent this, the bill has provisions on environment impact assessment, EIA, and the rights of nature, recognizing its intrinsic and inherent value. Just because we're assigning value to these previously undervalued stocks and services does not mean that we can just pay to destroy them. At the committee hearing last May 29 this year, DNR Secretary Maria Antonia Loizaga said, and I quote, "We must measure what we treasure as a country." Simply said. She followed up by saying that it would help map possible directions in the development of the nation beyond traditional indicators and allow us to explore multiple trajectories for social, economic, and environment development from the valuation of our natural resources. I hasten to remind our august body, however, that NCA must not be merely a province of the DNR, but an overarching system to govern our entire economy. Mr. President, when I stood here more than 15 years ago, when we spoke about disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, when we spoke in our first and second term about geotagging and climate tagging our budgets, at the time, it was not fully understood and supported, but fast forward 10 or 15 years later, it's being done by DBM and DOF. I'd like to say that this is a similar measure that we could consider whose time has come. And let it be said that the efforts of the government agencies that I mentioned and the United Nations as well leads the way and the path towards this sustainable journey. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. I request and appeal for the support of the leadership and the members of this chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague. Senator Laura Legarda, Senate President Pro Tempore. And I believe Senator Risa is also raising her hand.
Yes, Mr. President, before we acknowledge our Deputy Minority Leader, may I just put into the record that Senator Revilla would like to insert into the record his co-sponsorship speech. The sponsorship speech is with me, and I just put into the record that it be inserted into the records, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. We insert that into the records. And
Yeah, I
before
move
we recognize Senator Risa, we'd just like to greet our Secretary of the Senate. Yes, he just stepped in before we forget.
We greeted him this afternoon.
Happy birthday to Secretary Renato Bantug, Ray Bantug of the Senate. Happy birthday.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President, is he exempted in
From the blowout rule?
the blowout rule for the
No,
senators?
he is not.
Thank you, Mr. President, for clarifying that. That is very clear, crystal
But
clear.
on his own time and his own
Yes.
affordable means, he can.
Yes, yes.
Come on.
No one is asking for a five-star hotel. Mr. President, I move that we recognize our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Yes, our distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros is recognized.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Maligayang bati kay Senate Sec Ray. At aabangan din po namin yung inyong birthday blowout. Mr. President, good sponsor, mabuhay sa ating Senate President pro tempore sa pag-sponsor nitong committee report ng panukalang batas tungkol sa Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System. At salamat din sa good sponsor sa pag-champion nito. Sa katunayan po, Mr. President, kapag naisabatas na po natin ito, this will be providing by law for our whole archipelago and all the ecosystems within her what we have been able to advocate pa lamang, Mr. President, based on foreign publications or formulae on a case-to-case basis. And I refer here, Mr. President, to at least a couple of earlier incidents. One, when a U.S. ship ran aground of reefs into Bataha. And then more recently, when Chinese vessels have been dredging our seabed to create their artificial islands, sa ganung mga insidente po, Mr. President, nakapag-advocate tayo na, mayroong formula itong nailathala sa isang, if I'm not mistaken, French marine science publication, a way to compute the damage that is owed, whether by one foreign country or another, to our country in terms of the environmental damage. At pangalawa, Mr. President, salamat din po sa good sponsor sa pagbanggit sa rights of nature. Dahil mayroon din po tayong pending bill dito sa Senado, the Rights of Nature Bill, filed in the previous Congress, refiled this Congress, na pwede pong maging companion measures itong PENCAS bill at yung Rights of Nature Bill na po na iyon, Mr. President, para maitayo talaga natin ang policy framework natin on the environment, on the economy, sa mas malawak na pananaw na sang-ayon po ako sa good sponsor, Mr. President. This is a bill and these are bills whose time has come. So muli, maraming salamat at mabuhay po sa good sponsor, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And in the course of the interpellation, we can understand more about it. Me and the minority floor
Mr.
leader.
President, may I just be allowed to make a very short manifestation?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr.
Majority.
President. Mr. President, let me associate myself to the speech of our distinguished Senate President pro tempore. I sincerely believe, Mr. President, that this particular measure will complement the bill that we are pushing for in this August chamber, Senate Bill number 577, which would give access to information to extractive industries. so that we'll be able to find out, Mr. President, how much they are causing whatever damage to our environment. I came from Bulacan, Mr. President. Everyone knows that. And in the last budget, last Senate hearing on the flooding that happened recently, we just found out that the DPWH alone is spending about 1 billion pesos every single day for flooding programs. Not included po dyan yung narinig natin kahapon ng DOTR. Not included po dyan what the DENR is doing. And that's why when the distinguished lady from Antique made mention about the Secretary of DPWH statement last night, and I was with her last night, I wish I got a chance to hear it. Perhaps the 1 billion a day of the flood control program of DPWH, we may probably do something about it, perhaps put it in environmental programs, Mr. President, instead of just putting it in the Department of Public Works and Highways. I also would like to raise, Mr. President, considering that I hail from Bulacan, yung Angat Dam po, nung ginawa po yun, ang promise po sa amin sa mga Bulakenyo, dahil nandito ang Angat Dam, may Bustos Dam, etc., mas gaganda ang serbisyo ng tubig at access sa clean water, Mr. President. But what happened after many years? Pinakamahal po na tubig na nabibili dun ho sa Bulacan, hindi po, mas mahal pa ho kaysa dito sa Metro Manila, pero dun po sa amin galing yung tubig. Nakakalungkot po, Mr. President, and I think this measure would address these issues that we are raising, considering that there will now be a clear accounting measures na masusukat po natin ano ba talaga yung kayamanan ng isang lugar at ano ho ba yung gagawin ng pamahalaan kung meron man na programa, gaano kalaki yung epekto nito at isa-sacrifice ba natin yung value nung isang lugar na gagalawin for a project, whether it is a government project or a private project. Mr. President, let me put on record that the Senate President pro tempore is nodding her head and giving a thumbs up. And she can't believe I understand what she's saying. I just don't know why, Mr. President. But Mr. President, kidding aside, Mr. President, it's very important. And one last issue that I'd like to raise, Mr. President. Every New Year, Mr. President, I come from Bukawi, the fireworks capital of the country. And every time, Mr. President, laging sinasabi, sinisisi yung mga Bukawenyo na gumagawa ng paputok, etc. Pollution ang pinuproduce ng paputok every December 31, Mr. President. Pero napaka-hipokrito, Mr. President, ng mga nagsasabi ng ganun na hindi naman nila naman tinitignan yung araw-araw na polusyon na pinuproduce dito sa EDSA. Hindi ko pinagtatanggol na dapat tuloy-tuloy yung paggawa ng paputok o pag-pollute natin ng ating environment because of the fireworks. But what I'm saying, Mr. President, dapat lagay natin sa tamang konteksto. Kasi meron pong mga livelihood na naaapektuhan. At tayo naman, dito sa Bukawi, for instance, Mr. President, we're more than willing na mag-transition tayo at tulungan natin yung ating mga kababayan na magkaroon ng livelihood program. Hindi yung laging dun lang po sila, nakasadlak po sila, wala na po silang ibang pagkakakitaan. And yet, ang sinasabi, ang sinisisi lagi tuwing New Year, pollution. Pero araw-araw, Mr. President, daan po kayo sa EDSA. Hindi na masukat kung gaano kalala yung pollution na pinuproduce ng ating mga sasakyan na bumabaybay sa EDSA. So again, Mr. President, let me just state for the record that this representation is in full support of this measure, and we would like to put on record that we wanted to participate actively in ensuring that we'll be able to not only pass this measure, but ensure that this will help our country and our people, most especially save our environment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with that, I move, and for our colleagues to study further the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2439 under Committee Report number 120. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we adjourn the session.
1 second. I believe our
I ask for a minute suspension, Mr.
yes,
President.
session suspended.
Yes, Mr. President, may I just, nag-motion na ba?
Wala pa.
Hindi ako nag-move. Yes, Mr. President, before we adjourn today's session, Mr. President, Malolos Congress is celebrating its 125th anniversary. And considering that we are all in unison in supporting and joining not only the people of Bulacan but also every single Filipino all over the country and all over the world. May I move, Mr. President, that we recognize our distinguished Senate President pro tempore, Senator Loren Legarda, for her speech, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Distinguished Senate President pro tempore.
I know the
Senator
hour
Loren
is
Legarda.
late, and I appreciate your patience with me. I just wanted to put it on record because Friday is a non-working day, at least for our session. And so, Mr. President, I would just like to manifest my call to our colleagues in the Senate as we mark the 125th anniversary of the opening of the Malolos Congress this Friday, September 15, 2023. This assembly of representatives from throughout the Philippines gathered in the Church of Baraswain in Malolos, Bulacan, to create laws that would govern the newly born Filipino nation. Many have been elected by the people in places that have been liberated from Spanish colonial rule, while some have been appointed to represent areas which the light of liberty was still to reach. The whole archipelago was represented, from as far north as Cagayan, as far south as Siasi and Jolo, as far west as Palawan, and as far east as Palau. Is correct, Palau? Yes, which our forebears considered as part of our family. This is actually, I hope this is accurate. The representatives braved armed skirmishes, including your grandfather,
Great-grandfather.
and my grandfather, and perhaps we can trace some of our senators who have some lineage from members of the Malolos Congress. They endured separation from loved ones to accomplish the work of building the nation. After all, the expulsion of invaders is just the first step. Their colonial rule had to be replaced with a government that upheld democracy and human rights, a government that would work to improve the lives of its citizens. In the Constitution that the Malolos Congress produced, we introduced to our national consciousness civil liberties such as the freedom of religion, the right to privacy, the right to due process, the separation of executive, legislative, and judicial powers, and the autonomy and empowerment of local governments. The Malolos Congress, alongside the revolutionary government led by President Emilio Aguinaldo, showed to the whole world our capability for self-governance as early as then. Aside from writing our own laws, we were able to establish local governments, a literary scientific university and public schools, a military academy, and newspapers with wide circulation. We sent representatives in various major cities in the world who brought with them copies of our Constitution and news of our victories. Although the republic that was born out of a struggle for freedom was interrupted by American colonial rule, we never stopped fighting for our independence, and we continue to defend it from internal and external threats. On Friday, we remain committed as we celebrate the 125th anniversary. As we do today, we remain committed to the ideals of representative democracy that our forebears enshrined in the Constitution they wrote. At the same time, just as they were guided and inspired by a rich history in discussing the Constitution, let us extend our full support to all who have been given the task of telling and retelling their stories, most especially the National Historical Commission on the Philippines of the Philippines, led by its able chairman, Dr. Emmanuel Franco Calairo. The NHCP leads us in sustaining the memory of our nascent republic by maintaining the Museo ng Republika ng 1899 in Baraswain and by marking the places connected with a rich Republican story. I invite my colleagues in the Senate and their staff to visit this museum in the home province of our Majority Leader and to join us as we open an exhibit which they have graciously brought to our own abode on Monday. Thank you very much, my dear colleagues. May we all continue to do our best to discharge the duties which have been given to us, not just by the people in the present, but by the legacy of our forebears. And just on a side note, we know that the Senate President, his grandfather, you'll name, is it Pablo Ocampo?
My great-great-grandfather, Pablo Ocampo Sr.,
Yes.
who the street is named after,
Was a representative.
was the first secretary of the Malolos Congress. My other great-great-grandfather, his cousin, is the controversial Pedro Paterno, who was the president of the Malolos Congress.
So imagine, a century later, Senate President Miguel Zubiri and Loren Legarda, whose great-grandfather, Ariston Helia, was the Antique representative in the Malolos Congress,
That's
and
correct.
we are now colleagues.
That's
what
correct.
do you call that? Serendipitous. But
Serendipitous, yes.
so I am certain many of us will find our connection with some members of the Malolos Congress. Please do not interpolate me because there's rich history on that. It's very interesting, but on Monday
Yes.
we have the exhibit here. Thank you and happy 125th
Yes.
to the Malolos Congress.
Happy one. Those are what we consider actually the founding fathers of our nation. If there were the founding fathers of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the members of the Malolos Congress could be considered our founding fathers of Philippine nation.
Mr. President, if I may, Mr. President, as the talking point now in this August chamber is our forefathers and the founding fathers, Mr. President, may I put into the record as can be checked in the books of history, Mr. President, before the Malolos Congress, before the Biak na Bato Republic, there is the Kakarong Republic. Kakarong Republic had a complete set of officials with Canuto Villanueva, and I will say it again, Canuto Villanueva, the great-great-great-grandfather of this representation, as Supreme Chief and Captain General of the Military Forces, and Eusebio Roque, also known by his nom de guerra, Maestrong Sebio, then head of the Katipunan Local Organization, Mr. President. And, of course, who would forget the Battle of Kakarong de Sili, Mr. President, in January 9 of 1897 in Pandi, Bulacan, Mr. President. The Kakarong Republic, based in the Little Fort in Pandi, was attacked by a force of Spaniards that massacred the Katipuneros there. At the end of the battle, General Eusebio Roque, our Maestrong Sebio, and Di Mabongo was captured by the Spaniards.
Was that
and
Bongo?
it was believed to be, Mr.
Di Mabongo?
President, more than
Okay.
6,000 Filipinos actually
I thought I heard you
were
say
killed,
Bongo
Mr.
also.
President. Di Mabongo, Mr. President.
Di Mabongo.
Di Mabongo. Di Mabungo, Mr. President. Kasama po ni Maestro Sebio. Just want to put that on record, Mr. President. And,
Maybe Senator Sherwin like to also put his ancestors on record. From, never mind.
Mr. President.
Please proceed, Majority
Yes, Mr.
Leader.
President. We'd like to just put on record our sincerest thanks and gratitude to our dear colleague, Senator Loren Legarda, who will be our special guest this coming Friday, Mr. President, sa Barasoing Church, Mr. President. And I heard magpapakain po siya ng Kai food doon, Mr. President. Si Senator Loren, sa mga taga-Bulacan na nakikinig sa atin. Mr. President, I move that we recognize our distinguished Deputy Minority Leader, Senator
Yes, our
Lisa
Deputy
Ontiveros,
Minority Floor
for
Leader
her
is
manifestation,
recognized.
Mr. President.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President. And salamat sa Senate President Pro Tempore sa pangunguna sa atin sa paggunita anyang Malolos Congress. At maraming salamat, dagang salamat sa Senate President at Majority Leader sa pagbibigay doon. Because commemorating our history is always important to do in timely fashion. Yung kasaysayan natin na punong-puno ng heroism, heartbreak, yung mga pagkukulang at pagkakamali din natin bilang mga tao, but still our constant efforts to learn. At lastly, Mr. President, dahil binanggit din ng Senate President Pro Tempore that an exhibit will be opening on Monday, ay sana po, hiling ko lang, ipaalala ito ng Senate President Pro Tempore sa atin sa Lunes muli, kahit sa pamamagitan ng kanilang manifestation on the floor, para dito sa Senado, meron tayong continuing commemoration of the Malolos Congress, which gave birth to the Malolos Republic, na sinubukan lang unahan yung Treaty of Paris. So, again, one of the heartbreaks and heartaches of our continuing and very important Philippine history. So, yun lang po, Mr. President,
like to also-
pagpapasalamat at
Yes.
paghiling. Salamat
Thank you,
kayo.
ma'am. Thank you, madam. And I'd like to also clarify, so we will have an exhibit in the Senate on Monday on the Malolos Congress. Oh, fantastic. Maybe you can invite us to help you cut the ribbon. Oh, we're all invited. We'll invite ourselves. We just invited ourselves. Thank you, Madam Senate President Pro Tempore. Then maybe you can add the picture of the great-great-grandfather of Joel. Of the, anong sayo?
Kakarong Desili,
Kakarong-
Mr. President.
Mr. President, it's a National Historical Commission who is setting up the exhibit.
Oh, wonderful.
So I don't know what photos or drawings they have
I
or
hope they
information.
put a photo of your great-great-great-grandfather.
I'm not sure if they have a photo of my great-grandfather. I'm not sure if they have the 50. Perhaps I'll ask my
Members.
staff who's listening now to ask them. I'm not curating it. So if your grandfather is not there, if his grandfather or my grandfather not there, let's not fault them or my
Yes.
office because we're not curating
Maybe our
it.
offices, since
We
it
will-
is by fact that
Yes.
our
We
great-great-grandfathers
should-
were part of that.
It's on record now,
Maybe
and
we
I'll
should
ask
ask
my
our
staff
staff,
to make
yeah.
sure that at least the three grandfathers whom we know were part of this history should be there. So, Dr. Calairo, we are on live online.
That's wonderful.
NHCP, please ensure that the three representatives of the Malolos Congress, if you have a photo, they may not have it on file. We see.
Yeah.
Yes. So an advisory
We can
has
assist
been
them
sent out
with their
or will
office.
be sent out to your offices as well.
Thank you
Because
very much.
this came about when we had the hearing just the other day. They mentioned it, and I know it was coming, but I felt bad that we did not have any exhibit in the Senate. And I said, can you bring it here, whatever materials you can?
May
So-
we request, Madam
Yes.
Sponsor, Madam Senate President Pro Tempore, if they have a copy, and I've been looking for this for quite a while, if they have a copy of the first Philippine Constitution
Yes.
that had come out of the first Malolos Congress,
I'm
signed
sure-
by all members, that would be a treat to
It's
have,
in
even a
Baraswain.
copy.
It is in Baraswain.
If they can exhibit a copy here.
Ah.
No, it's a copy. It's like the Declaration of Independence. They have
We will
copies.
ask them, well, first, the photographs of the members. I'm not sure if it's 50 or 80. How many members are there? It varies, huh? Some sources say 50, the others 80. So we leave it to the NHCP to determine how many. And second, we will ask them if there is a copy, not the original, obviously,
Yes.
of the first Philippine Constitution. I hope that is part of the exhibit. So who's in charge? You ask them now. If it's not a very good exhibit, I'm not a curator, sir. Okay, then we can check on Monday and
Yes.
critique it so that they can improve on it the next day, right?
Yes.
But that's NHCP. NHCP, be forewarned that we have high expectations,
High expectations,
of the
absolutely.
125th Malolos Congress exhibit in the halls of the Philippine Senate. But to be fair to them, we only asked them this a few days ago. I think Senator Binay was with us in our budget hearing chaired by Senator Cayetano. Right?
And I
It was-
believe in the new Senate, in this new Senate building, we have a very respectable museum in the new building, intended for history. We can put some of those documents as well, copies of those documents and those pictures in the new Senate building. Because the Malolos Congress also came out or instituted the legislative branch of the Philippine Republic. It started there. in that Congress. So it would be quite interesting to see. Those were our first representatives.
Yes.
As a matter of fact.
Yes, the first representatives, congressmen.
Yes.
Yes, some were appointed, some were elected.
Correct.
And there were still skirmishes in different parts of the country.
Yes.
How
That is
interesting.
very correct.
Right? So I told them,
How
there should have
interesting.
been a nationwide celebration. That's 125th anniversary. But we can do it till the end of the year anyway.
Yes.
In Bulacan, it's
Big,
non-working holiday.
very good. But we want to work, okay? We want to work on
Yeah,
Friday.
I'm just
so-
saying. I'm just saying.
Okay.
In our
Thank you,
beloved
Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank
President,
you.
let me just also correct myself, Mr. President. I mentioned 6,000 deaths. 6,000 men, 600 Cazadores soldiers fought in the Kakarong de Sili battle, and 1,000 plus, 1,024 were killed, and about
a major
70
battle.
plus
That's a
major
major
battle, Mr.
battle.
President. Nung bata po ako, Mr. President, laging sinasabi, hanggang bukong-bukong ang dugo na umagos po sa lugar ng Pandi, Bulacan.
Sino kalaban po nila? Yung Castilla?
Spaniards, Mr. President.
Castilla.
Yes.
Castilla pa.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished colleagues. At this juncture,
Yeah.
I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 18, 2023. So
There
moved, Mr.
being no
President.
objection, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 18, 2023. Please stay safe, everyone, and have a
Thank you,
good
Mr.
weekend.
President. Happy birthday, Seg Bantug.